I've been asked a lot of questions about this terrible Texas flooding event. Why did it happen? And it doesn't flood like this in this part of the country. You know, it wasn't a hurricane, all these different things. Look, it's an absolute terrible, tragic event. We pray for all the families involved. We pray for all those who have lost loved ones. With that being said, though, let's talk about, why this happens. A lot of people think that, hey, I'm not on the coast like you can see right here, so I don't have to worry about this happening. Well, in fact, sadly, many of these situations, in fact, this part of Texas, more than a decade ago in Wimberley, Texas, a similar situation where a family was wiped away overnight by a flash flood. Sometimes these flash floods come out of nowhere. Even though we do have proper warnings and things, they're called flash floods because they happen so fast. In fact, in some of these situations like this one, probably will go back and be called what's called a flood emergency, which happens even faster. There literally is very little time to respond. And understanding that, though, we have to understand that, look, flooding is not a coastal thing. Flooding happens across the country. We watched this happen in Birmingham, Alabama, about 4 years ago now, where 82 home rescues had to be done 2 hours because they received 10 inches of rain in about 4 hours. We saw it happen in St. Louis. We saw it happen in Waverly, Tennessee, 17 inches in 24 hours, where so many people were killed. So, in understanding this, though, we have to make sure we're prepared. First of all, we have to understand, when it comes to covering our belongings, typically, home insurance is not going to cover flood damage. This means that in almost every situation outside the coast, you need to have a separate flood insurance policy that covers your building, covers contents, and if you have a private policy, it could potentially cover additional loss of use, which means if you need a place to stay while your house is being repaired, this is where additional loss of use can come into play. And looking at this, though, don't get fooled by flood zones like so many people do. Oh, I'm in flood zone X. I don't need flood insurance. Mortgage company tells me I don't need it. I don't have to worry about it. Wrong. Remember, some of these regulatory flood zones are outdated by sometimes 5, 10, 15 years. In fact, if you look at the overall process, it typically takes about 5 years for a flood zone to change anyway. Imagine everything that could happen in that 5 years. Instead, what you should be looking at is a flood risk score. And in the description of this video, you can actually check our website for your flood risk score. You're looking for your distance to water. You're looking for your actual flood risk score and things like that. Not so much your flood zone or whether a bank's going to require it. Even if a bank's not going to require it, we still recommend every property having it, especially the flooding we're seeing in Texas. The flooding we're going to see from Tropical Storm Chanel up the eastern seaboard. The flooding we recently saw in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. You see, it's happening all across the country. And flood insurance is one way we can give ourselves the financial protection. But in this video, I specifically wanted to talk about the sad situation in Texas with the flash flooding and the flood emergency and what you can do. One of the easiest things you can do is have a plan for your family, have flood insurance in place. Remember, the first thing is make sure your family's safe. The second part is making sure everything else is safe. Maybe you need to move your contents to higher ground and things like that. Always make sure your family's safe first. Always making sure you've got flood insurance in place at all times. Not just during hurricane season, but at all times. I hope everybody has a great day.